The book back in the day when young guys would read it and were influenced by it and became tyrants in a bad way and bad behavior because of it, which was very obvious to see. Some of them ran into bad problems in their careers and they had to turn those things around.
But I refuse to stay in a victim mentality. I gotta stand and fight for my honor and my family. That's how I did it, cause you know that's how it had to be. So now I'm slaying dragons and I do it happily. I told them I refuse to be another casualty. I looked inside the dragon's eyes and then I told them casually, hi, I'm a dragon slayer and I got a dragon lair. I'ma go and slay a dragon, then I'm gonna drag him there. I don't care, I ain't scared. Look inside my heart and there's a line there. Conquering my dragon.
So we're going to talk about how to actually read the 48 Laws of Power, because there's an interesting thing. Now, this book goes way back. I'm going to give you a little history of this before I dive into each law and how you can effectively interpret that so that you can be better at what it is you're doing. So first of all, this book came on the scene in, let's see, I actually could go back through my career to remember, but Penguin Books in 2000. And I remember the first time somebody showed it to me back then, 24 years ago. And I had a big organization at the time. And it was a young guy who said, hey, man, you got to read the 48 Laws of Power. And then he started telling me some of these laws and started actually talking about how in his organization, within my organization, he was using them. And I was like, panicked. I said, oh my gosh, you can't do that, because you would be the biggest jerk on planet Earth. And he's like, oh, it's in a book, 48 Laws of Power. So therefore, I have to do it because I'm going to be successful. And I recognized he had no ability to discern good advice from bad advice, or for him to interpret why something was written in the first place. Now, at the time, I took a pretty strong stance against Robert Greene's motives and intentions. I would prefer not to do that sort of thing. I personally prefer to find the good things in a message that people have and why it's good or why it's intelligent, and then to decipher other things. And I recently heard him interviewed where he said, basically, if you were to, and years ago he said this too, if you were to actually use all of these laws, you'd be very hard to live with. And then he even went on to say 2/3 of the book are really good laws that people would use to be effective, and then 1/3 of them are kind of a self-admitted manipulation, he more or less said. And so in credit to Robert Greene, at least in his latest interviews, he seems to make a greater acknowledgement of that. Now, I'm not a Robert Greene historian or a biographer, so there may be gaps in all of this. But I just remember the book back in the day when young guys would read it and were influenced by it and became tyrants in a bad way and bad behavior because of it, which was very obvious to see. Some of them ran into bad problems in their careers and they had to turn those things around and don't actually act like that now. But to his point, they kind of use the material to not be manipulated by other people who are trying to put power over them in a particular way. And that's very, very important. I must say, just in an overall sense, when you read the book, The 48 Laws of Power, he has really interesting writing. He uses all sorts of historical references to make his point. He has reversal points, the contrary point when you would not apply this when you would. So it's interesting writing. But in order to keep this simple, because the book is pretty long, and while you might want to read each particular chapter in depth, that's the best way to read a book, he has the laws summarized. So I want to go through the summary for the sake of the videos to make it a little bit easier. Law number 1, never outshine the master. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. This has problems written all over it from the beginning in so many big ways. But it has an unusual amount of wisdom in it at the same time if applied accurately. And even has in the reversal thing, there's a time to outshine the master. But I want to give this to you in light of leading giants, what we teach. We teach the idea of lead giants. How do you lead giants? It's literally the opposite of this. If you're going to lead giants, you want to find people, and the best people, the most successful people will say the opposite perspective of this from a leadership perspective. Now, he's talking about a followership perspective. You're subordinate to somebody else, don't outshine them. But what I would say to the leader is make sure you find people that outshine you. Make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room, that you have people that are going to become way bigger than you ever were in that particular role. And ironically, they will never be outshining you, because the brighter they shine, the brighter you shine. But if you take this particular advice, you're never going to act the best you can. You're going to hold back. You're going to and if you don't hold back, you're going to manipulate in a way that is not effective. Here's why you should always outshine the master. And I mean this, literally, here's why you always outshine the master. Because if you have a master that is not going to want you to outshine them, get your ass out of there. That's why. It's how you identify good leadership or not. If you become great at what it is you're doing and you're threatening the person who is above you, you don't want to be led by that person, and that's time to leave. You shouldn't stay. But if you're with somebody that the better you become, the more they're shining the light on you and the more they're enthusiastic and the more they empower you to do greater things within that organization, that's what you're around a person you want to be around with, and it makes sense. Can you imagine if back in the day, Phil Jackson was jealous of Michael Jordan so he wouldn't let him shine or play because it didn't make him look as good? No, it makes no sense at all. Or can you imagine Jordan saying, hey, Pippen, tone it down a little bit because I don't look as good? No. By the way, Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson demanded the highest level of performance from each one of the players. Why? Because the better they looked, the better he looked. So just remember, it's very, very bad advice to never outshine the master. Don't do it, okay? Outshine the master, and it will tell you whether or not he's actually a worthy master for you to follow in the first place. And if you are the master, don't be the type of person that people are going to be afraid to outshine. The greater they are, the more you're elevated too. If you do that, you can be a giant. We can go slay some dragons.